Hi, and welcome to the New Starter program. Today we're going to be talking about an introduction to the NDIS. The NDIS is a big area, so today we're going to talk through NDIS plans, service agreements, reviews, reports, registrations, and how all of these things are linked to our MDT process at Concentric. So what is the NDIS? The NDIS, or the NDIA, is a National Disability Insurance Scheme or agency. It's a national model, so each state is governed by the same commission and undergoes the same strict auditing process. It's not a welfare system, so it's not designed to provide financial support to participants. It's not designed to provide funding for something that every human being would be expected to have. So think about the NDIS as an insurance scheme. What we want to make sure is that we're meeting the needs for the client, but also considering what is reasonable and necessary for them. However, we need to not only look at the positives of what we're doing in therapy and all the achievements that our clients have made, we also need to consider what their worst day might look like to make sure that they've got adequate funding to support them on that day. The NDIS works on a reasonable and necessary criteria or model. What this means is they'll only fund things if they're related to the participant's disability. So we need to make sure that when we're providing information on what's needed for a client, it's related to their listed disability or diagnosis. It must not include day-to-day living costs that are not related to the participant's disability support needs, like groceries, for example. What we're providing should represent value for money. It must be likely to work for the participant and should take into account the support given to the client by other government services, their families, carers, networks, and other communities. We also need to take into consideration that our supports promote choice and control for the participant, so they have their choice about what they would like out of what's being provided. When we look at a participant's NDIS plan, we start by looking at the cover page. This gives us information about the participant's full name, NDIS number, and NDIS plan dates. The plan dates are vital because they dictate the service agreement dates, which in turn dictate the service booking dates. These are the dates in which we're able to make appointments to see the clients. It also includes the participant statement. In here, you'll find the participant's contact details, date of birth, and a little bit about them, their support networks, and their community, as well as other people who are involved in their care. Then we look at participant goals. This is the most important page in the NDIS. 80 to 90% of the client's funding is there because of the first mentioned short-term goal. When we look down through the funded supports information, this page clarifies key terminology in the plan. It also talks about management options. So self-management is when clients pay for their own services and then claim them back from the NDIS. Plan managed is when you have a plan manager or an organisation that supports with the funding and ensuring that bills are paid for you. Agency managed is when it goes directly through the NDIS and we can do a service booking through the portal. There's also mixed method managed funding, where certain categories are paid by different managed services. So you might be within your core supports and have them agency managed, but then within the capacity building area, where therapy comes in, the client might be self-managed. It's important to know how a participant's NDIS funding is managed, because if they're self or plan managed, they don't have to go with an NDIS registered provider, where if they're agency managed, they do need to be going to a registered provider, such as Concentric. In an NDIS plan, you'll see something called stated supports that sometimes says you'll also need a quote required, or there might be nothing. In stated supports, it means that the participant's plan or dollar figure is locked for the purpose of that stated item or stated therapy. If it's not a stated support, then the funds are generally used quite flexibly within that category. If you see quote required, that means the agency didn't have a benchmark figure to assign to that line item. You probably won't get many of those, but it means that you'll need to submit a quote in order to ensure that the client is appropriately funded, and then it's reflected in their next plan. Going into the different categories, we see core supports. These relate to any assistance with personal tasks and activities of daily living, which can include personal care. It includes assistance with domestic activities. So if a client has a cleaner who comes in once a fortnight, this comes out of there. Social, civic, community participation, supported accommodation, supported independent living, and individualised living options and accommodation also come out of here, and also any low level, low risk, low cost items and consumables like continence products, ready made meals, PEG related products, and transport funding. Sometimes respite funding, which is used for short or medium term accommodation, can also come from here. Then we move into the category of capacity building. This area is really important for us as therapists because this is where our funding comes from. Capacity building funds are intended to build capacity within the individual. It's expected that those who deliver capacity building funding will train other people in the participant support network, so ultimately the funding allocation can reduce over time. It's important to note that from the NDIS's perspective, they want to reduce capacity building funding as soon as they can, and we should be aiming to train and support workers and other individuals to be able to support the participants. So take that into consideration when planning therapy or whatever the client needs. Capacity building funding supports workers to make themselves redundant in a way. Although the agency does recognise that there are some participants where it's not reasonable to expect capacity building supports to reduce, such as clients with severe or progressive conditions. When we look at it, we've also got support coordination. There are different levels of support coordination depending on the needs of the client. The higher the level, the more specialist the support coordinator. We also have plan managers. So these are the participant's elected provider to pay for NDIS supports. And then we've got categories such as improved living arrangements, social and community participation. There's also an area for finding and keeping a job. The areas that we see most at Concentric in improved relationships are positive behaviour support, improved health and wellbeing, so supports that focus on building and maintaining a participant's health and wellbeing, like exercise physiology and dietetics, and improved living to increase participation and engage in education. This is where a lot of our physios, OTs, speechies, psychs, and even PBS come from our daily living funding. Exercise physiology and dietetics can also come out of here. So the supports are designed from this area to build the capacity of participants and their support network to undertake tasks related to daily activities. Then we move on to capital supports. These are an investment on behalf of the agency. This support category includes all aids or equipment supports that assist participants to live independently or assist their carer to support the participant. It also includes the related delivery, setup, and training for some support items. Most support items require assistive technology application forms, quotes, and evidence of trials. All capital supports are stated supports. That means the funding is locked and it's not transferable. Within that area, we get mid-cost and high-cost AT. So currently, anything more than $1,500 is considered mid-cost, and high cost is anything over $15,000. This also includes things like specialised disability accommodation funding, home modifications, car modifications, and repairs and rentals of equipment, as well as some AFOs and KAFOs. The NDIS plan dates are important to us also. These can range from 3 months to 1 year, 2 years, even 5 years in duration. The shorter the date range indicates that intensive therapy intervention is required and is a priority. It's also a time when the NDIS is trying to identify exactly what's needed for the client. So we get increased funding for a short period of time so we can do the assessments, some intervention, and write a thorough report to support adequate funding ongoing for that client. 1 year is a pretty stock standard NDIS plan. When participants start to get 2 to 3 year plan durations, it generally indicates to the NDIS that the participants' needs are not going to change too much, and we're not expecting too much change over time. Service agreements are important. These are a formal agreement between the participant and the provider. They help to ensure that there's shared understanding of the expectations and respective responsibilities and obligations of the provider and the client. It's simple and set out to show how and when supports will be delivered. The service agreement includes information about the supports, prices, how, when, and where supports will take place, the duration of the service agreement, which links back to the NDIS plans, how we can change or end the service agreement, the responsibilities for both the participant and the provider, and also information about if any problems or issues arise, how these will be handled. So when we're looking at the service agreement hours and funding, we want to ensure that the hours to complete assessment, equipment, trials, completion of reports, follow-up assessments, and treatment are agreed upon at the initial meeting or within 3 sessions of meeting the client. We also need to make sure that the service agreement is signed. We want to ensure to keep the support coordinator and plan manager up to date with how many hours we'll require, including travel time, to ensure that the participant has enough funding in the plan to access the services they require. Understand that this is just a guide of the hours required, but make sure that you bill all the hours you do require to provide the appropriate support to your client. Use your schedule of supports or your therapy plan and discuss this with the client. This is an addendum to the service agreement and shows how our budget breakdown is going to likely happen throughout the plan. Our initial assessment consists of 30 minutes non-face-to-face liaison, an hour of face-to-face consultation, and a 30-minute phone call. In this time, we complete our MDT process documentation, our initial assessment questionnaires, and we start to formulate some tentative goals for our clients. When it comes to NDIS reviews, depending on the position that the participant finds themselves in, they're eligible to apply for a review of their NDIS plan, and their situation dictates which review they must go for. So if they've got a scheduled plan review, that's generally yearly, or if it's a 2-year plan, it would be every 2 years. You can have an unscheduled plan review, which is when there might be a change of circumstance. So, for example, if the participant relocates and the availability of service reduces, they may need a change of circumstance plan. There may also be a change in the client's condition. So the client has deteriorated a lot faster and needs more support than the funding that has been allocated in the current plan. Then we have an internal review. So if a participant receives their plan and they're not happy with the funding allocation, they can request an internal review. This must be lodged within 3 months of the NDIS plan start date, and it's not the original planner who conducts the review. It's a fresh set of eyes. There's also an external review, which is an appeal, and if the participant's not happy with the outcomes of the internal review request, they can apply to the AAT for an independent review. This request must be submitted to the AAT within 28 days of receiving the outcome from the internal review. When we look at NDIS reports, there are a few support items and therapies that stipulate that a report is required to be submitted at the end of the plan. This means that we need to communicate to the NDIS what's happened in the time that we've been seeing the client and the outcomes of the intervention. So ultimately a progress report. What worked well, what did not work well, what were the barriers to implementation, goals and observed outcomes. It also gives us a chance to state our recommendations for the next plan period. An NDIS review report must be submitted to the NDIS 8 weeks before the NDIS end of plan. So we recommend booking in your reports 12 weeks prior to the end of the plan, so it gives you time to complete the report, get it reviewed, and submit it to the NDIS with clear, strong recommendations and goals for the next plan. Here are some examples of report writing tips that you can use to help with your reports. So using plain language, understanding what's reasonable and necessary, focusing on readability, and making sure that you're writing for the person who's actually reading your report. Avoid lots of jargon terms. Be goal-related, stay within your scope, so refer on to other scopes if necessary. Provide evidence for everything you talk about, and respond to the reasonable and necessary criteria. Lastly, we're going to talk about NDIS registration. So to maintain our registration with the NDIS Commission, all providers undergo an audit against the NDIS practice standards. These practice standards are a series of requirements that set out the standard of service you must deliver to become and maintain your registration as an NDIS provider. The NDIS practice standards create an important benchmark for providers to assess performance and to demonstrate that you provide high quality and safe supports and services for your participants. Each NDIS practice standard is built from a high-level participant outcome supported by quality indicators. Providers require a certification audit to provide more complex or higher risk support services, which we do at Concentric. And in order for the certification audit, the providers must be assessed against these practice standards, including assessment against the core modules, which you can see below, and any supplementary modules relevant to the type of support that is adhered to. Now, how does this all link to our MDT procedure at Concentric? Our initial assessment has a consistent process. Each participant accesses the most appropriate supports to meet their needs, goals, and preferences. Our MDT client meetings allow for active decision-making with our clients. We communicate with our participants about the provision of supports and are responsive to their needs. Our therapy planning is without interruption wherever possible. Our supports are planned with each participant to meet their specific needs and preferences, and their needs and preferences are documented and provided to them prior to commencing work with them to ensure that the participant experience is consistent with their expressed preferences. The supports and criteria are clearly defined and documented. The support plans describe the intervention and their functional outcomes. Our quality reviews allow that we oversee and are overseen by a robust governance and operational management system, and we provide and document programs of internal audits. Our end-of-plan reviews and plan reset shows that we have quality management systems in place to support continuous improvement. By doing so, and by doing audits, we're also making sure that the plan reset and outcomes are going to have quality goal reviews and great outcomes for our clients. If you have any questions about this, please reach out to your clinical mentor or clinical consultant, and they'll be happy to help.